What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, and today we are going to be discussing extremely bizarre close encounters. So, there are millions of people throughout the world who are very familiar with the alien grays, whether through personal contact, abductions, or even what we see on TV or in the movies. When someone says the word alien or extraterrestrial, the grays are the first image that they see in their mind's eye. I have discussed here on this channel with you guys quite a few times other alien beings though, extraterrestrials that are very different from the gray aliens we have come to know and mostly love so well. This is another one of those videos. The grays are undoubtedly the most recognized and recognizable beings, but they are not, by a long shot, the only ETs that come here to visit us for whatever reason. All of these beings seem to have a different agenda, and some of them we still don't know what the heck they were doing here or why they visited us at all in the first place. Mainly, the only thing that they all have in common is that they aren't from here. So, grab onto your booty probes and lay on a cold table. Here are some of the strangest and most bizarre extraterrestrial entities that I have ever come across, that I have ever encountered. Let's jump right in. On the night of December 6, 1978, in the village of Torriglia in Italy, a night watchman named Pier Zanfretta was on one of his routine patrols when he encountered something not only out of this world, but really bizarre. Pier didn't have just one encounter though. He had a series of them, and by the end of it, he was questioning his own reality and his own sanity. Our witness was on his way to his client's home. The client wasn't there, but Pierre was doing his due diligence and making sure the home was protected from intruders and really anything else that would come along and disturb the property while the homeowners were gone. On his way to his client's house, his car suddenly and inexplicably lost power, and Pierre had to pull over to the side of the road within eyesight of the client's house and see what was going on with his vehicle. Before he got out of his car, though, he looked through the window and saw something unbelievable. Before he got out of his car, he looked through the driver's side window and saw 4 small lights moving around the backyard of the house that he was supposed to be inspecting. Our witness immediately assumed that these beams were coming from flashlights, so he got out of his car, revolver and his own flashlight in his hand. He, of course, assumed that these were people who were holding what he thought were flashlights, and so he decided to act very stealthily when he made his approach. After all, he thought there were 4 of them, and despite his weapon, he's only one man. Perhaps he imagined that these were intruders, and that's exactly what his job was. It was to protect the property from this exact thing. Right when he was about to jump out and surprise the trespassers, though, he felt something tap him on the back of his shoulder. He immediately turned around and was confronted with some being that he described as, quote, an enormous, green, ugly, and frightful creature with undulating skin as though he were very fat or dressed in a loose gray tunic, no less than 10 feet tall, end quote. There were 2 others as well. 2 of the exact same creatures were standing, one on each side of the being that had tapped him on his shoulder originally. Our witness further described the creatures as being hairy, having horns on the sides of their faces, green skin, triangular-shaped eyes that glowed a bright yellow, and red veins that looked to be always there, kind of stuck and bulging out of their foreheads. This is really crazy. The creatures' mouths were what shocked Pierre the most, though, because they all had this weird equipment that was self-illuminating and fit over the mouth, reminiscent of oxygen/breathing apparatuses that we use here on Earth. You know, those big, like rubber or plastic things that have the hose, like that. Pierre was shocked and terrified and tried his best to quickly get back into his car as fast as he can and away, far away from these entities. However, as he approached his car, a light came from behind him, and when he looked over his shoulders to see where it was coming from, he saw a massive UFO slowly descending from the night sky above. He explained that he heard a very loud hissing noise that came from the craft, and before he knew what was happening, he was being blasted with a huge gust or ray of extreme heat. He stumbled back to his car, shocked and in excruciating pain. He contacted the security company that he worked for, and the person who answered his pleas on the other end of the radio later testified and recounted that Pierre was babbling nonsensically and stuttering incoherently, saying things like, quote, they aren't men, end quote, and, quote, by God, they are ugly, end quote. About an hour or so later, the guards that Pierre had called for backup finally arrived, and they found Pierre lying on the frozen ground, and when they went to help him up, they noticed that his clothes were still warm to the touch, very warm. Behind the house in the backyard, there were several horseshoe-shaped markings that came from an extremely heavy object that had obviously been standing there for quite a while. A little later, once this report from Pierre became public, it was discovered that at least 52 other residents of this small village saw a bright light coming from the exact same area where our witness had had his otherworldly encounter. He also said there were other beings as well who he saw, along with the ones he described in the original account. He said that he came across gigantic non-human footprints where he lived, like at his house, and plenty of other tangible evidence that he believes lends credibility to and backs up his original and subsequent claims. Now, I don't know what this other tangible evidence was, and if I'm just going by my gut and my intuition, I would say that he liked the attention from the original encounter. But is that being too dismissive of something that really actually happened? Were these beings kind of just the first to come and visit this poor man? I really don't know. That's where the encounter ends. Our next account is one that is not only one of the strangest I've ever come across, but it's also one of the most widely witnessed in general. On September 27th, 1989, in Voronezh, Russia, dozens of people reported seeing a gigantic red object circling above a popular park and hangout spot local to the area. They described it as a, quote, vehicle, end quote, but said that it hovered approximately 40 feet above them as they watched on in horror and awe. The craft was hovering about 40 feet above a large group of kids who were visiting the park for a school trip. According to what witnesses later stated, there was some sort of hatch underneath the craft, and when it opened up, some very bizarre creatures came tumbling out of it. The entity was neckless with extremely long arms, 9 feet tall or more, and had a tiny dome-shaped head. It wore bronze boots with a silver jumpsuit, and the being was actually large enough, or so it seemed, to completely fill this hatch. It had 3 eyes, whites on the sides, kind of like what we have, but the middle was red and, quote, swiveling around like a radar, end quote. Not sure exactly what that means. Maybe the eyes were swiveling around. There was also some sort of disc-like object in the center of its chest. As the entity exited its craft, it actually bent an entire tree in half. Once the being exited, though, it became very clear that it wasn't in fact alone, as 2 other identical beings walked right out behind it. That wasn't all, though, because behind the 3 original creatures was a robot thing with buttons going all down the front of it. One of the alien beings actually turned and adjusted these buttons on the robot thing, which seemed to have enabled it to walk around, though it did so in a very mechanical and quote-unquote robotic type of way. Before they left, all of the beings in their robot as well began to emit very weird, seemingly patterned light beams from their chests. They took samples of the soil there in the park. They would continuously disappear and reappear several feet away. They did this several times. It's even claimed they vaporized one of the teenagers that was standing by and watching this entire debacle. The ship took off and ascended back into the sky, and as it did, the teenager reappeared. Now, guys, I just want to talk about this allegedly vaporized teenager because that's what stuck out to me the most, and here's why. I am so pissed that I could not find any more information about this particular part of the story. I would really like to know what happened to him and like what was his experience throughout the time he was vaporized until he reappeared again. Like, where did he go? What was his experience of that? But with nothing further, let's just move on, I guess. On August 21st, 1955, at approximately 7 p.m. near Hopkinsville, Kentucky in the United States, a family named the Taylors were visiting with their friends, the Suttons, when our next strange and bizarre encounter happened. The Suttons had a well on their property, a rustic farmhouse, and one of the Taylors, Billy Ray, went out to go and get some water from it. What happened next would change both of these families' lives forever. While Billy Ray was out there at the well, he saw what he described as a rainbow-colored, gleaming, and disc-shaped object land in a gorge just off the property about a mile away. He was scared, and so he ran back as fast as he could to tell everyone else what he had just seen. His family and the Sutton family both laughed at him and insisted that what he had seen was nothing more than a shooting star. How someone could ever mistake what Billy Ray saw and described as a shooting star is beyond me, but it just goes to show what I always say is true and completely demonstrates my point. People will create whatever they want and tell themselves whatever they can in order to explain away what they don't understand, what they don't want to know about, and really anything extraterrestrial, supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly. So anyways, they told him his eyes and his mind were playing tricks on him. They would not be able to try and convince themselves or Billy Ray of this for long though, because a few moments later, the Suttons' dog started barking very aggressively into the darkness outside. Taylor and Elmer Sutton grabbed their guns and decided to go and investigate what the dogs were barking about. They ran outside thinking perhaps that there was someone in their yard who didn't belong there, and in a way, they were exactly right, but it wasn't what any of them had expected. There was a 3-foot-tall luminous being with glowing eyes, a giant and very oversized head, pointed and floppy ears, thin legs, a narrow mouth, and talons as fingernails. This creature was just floating a few inches above the ground and was wearing a silver metallic jumpsuit type thing. It immediately charged at the two men as they stood there with their guns aimed at it, and also they were trying to process what it was they were seeing. They were stunned for a second. The men were shocked and terrified, and so they fired their weapons as the creature charged at them with its hands in the air. However, when the shots were fired, the being did several backflips and disappeared into the woods. It seemed as though it had not been hit by any of the gunfire. Taylor and Elmer ran as fast as they could back into the house. Before they could tell the others what had transpired, though, the same being was spotted peering through the window of the farmhouse by the two men. The two men fired more shots at the thing, blasting right through the already opened screened window, but when they ran outside, there was no corpse, no injured creature, there was nothing there, and it seemed to have escaped the gunfire altogether again. There was no blood or anything, and in fact, there was nothing at all except the remnants of the broken and blasted through screen window. A being that was either the exact same one or one very similar jumped down onto the men off of the awning over the porch and immediately entangled its gnarly and taloned fingers into the one guy's hair. Which guy, I'm not sure. Somehow, it said that despite it being entangled in the one man's hair with no intentions of letting go or giving up, they fired again, but this being too just missed being shot and took off running into the surrounding woods. By now, the men had been off the porch and chasing this creature into the woods, still firing their rifles at it and missing it seemingly every single time. As they continued and kept running after it, there was suddenly a whole crew of these beings chasing after them as they now ran back to the farmhouse to inform the others of what was going on and what they had encountered. The beings were already running all over the rooftop of the farmhouse and were also appearing simultaneously in all of the windows both upstairs and down. There were 11 people, men, women, and children alike, in the tiny little home, and they were all more than terrified and more horrified than they had ever been in their entire lives. Bullets were doing absolutely nothing to affect these things. It's like they were completely and totally bulletproof, though no one could quite see how it was that the rounds were missing the targets completely. Finally, after 3 hours of being tormented by these beings who refused to get off of the roof and stop peeking through the windows, they were banging, clanging, making all types of noises throughout the entire house. The families had had enough and decided to make a fast break for the two vehicles that were still parked outside. One of the kids who was there would later report that the creatures, quote, stuck to the side of the house in the way a spider would, end quote. They did make it to the cars though, and they drove immediately to the local sheriff's station. The sheriff at the time was a man named Russell Greenwell, and he and his deputies were there that night when the petrified families came running into the office, ranting and raving about what they had just experienced with these strange otherworldly beings. They were quickly able to determine that no one was drunk or insane and that there were very credible witnesses, and so the sheriff and his deputies went back to the farmhouse with the two families to investigate the crazy and otherworldly allegations. Sheriff Greenwell would later go on to say, quote, "These were not the sort of people who normally ran to the police. Something frightened them, something beyond their comprehension," end quote. Initially, the officers noticed nothing that would back up these claims that the creatures had been there, and only the remnants of all the shots fired seemed to be what remained. However, some neighbors did report hearing all of the gunfire, and an independent witness in the form of a highway patrolman reported seeing strange, quote, meteor-like objects, end quote, flying around in the sky above him that very same night, quote, with a sound like artillery fire coming directly from them, end quote. This had all been heard and witnessed a little bit earlier in the night than when the family had experienced their terror involving the entities. So basically, the quote-unquote artillery fire heard by the independent witness could not have been all of the shots being fired by the rifles at the creatures, because this happened before the encounter at the farmhouse happened. The sheriff and his deputies, after doing a thorough search of the farmhouse and the surrounding area, mainly the woods, assured both the Taylors and the Suttons that there was nothing more to fear and that most likely, in their opinions, the worst was over for them. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before the creatures returned and started climbing around on the walls on the outside of the house and also, once again, peering into all of the windows. Once again as well, the men didn't know what to do and started shooting again. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what I would be doing at this point if I were just a regular Joe who knew nothing about extraterrestrials and all of that. I'm sure I would be terrified, but at the same time, I don't know if I want to keep shooting up my home or my friend's home because these creatures were, again, seemingly impervious to bullets and gunfire. The beings kept up their harassment until just about the time the sun began to come up on the horizon, and then they left, never to return again. Not long after this incident, though, the Suttons left the farmhouse where the incident occurred and moved to a different location. This incident has come to be known as the Hopkinsville Goblins incident, and I have a major problem with that because as bizarre as these creatures looked, they look nothing like what an actual goblin looks like, and goblins are fey creatures, not extraterrestrials. We still don't know if they're one and the same. There may be a connection, but I feel like the reason this bothers me so much, guys, is because naming an extraterrestrial goblin, it just, I don't know, it's like more likely to confuse people and more likely to pull the skeptics out of the woodwork. Like these may have looked like what someone saw as a goblin being drawn as a cartoon in a storybook or something or on a movie or something sometime, but that's not what goblins look like. And again, are fae and extraterrestrial one and the same? We don't know. I would just prefer that it be called the Hopkinsville Extraterrestrial Incident. It is what it is though, guys, and that's all I have on that particular incident. I cannot even begin to guess at what these specific creatures wanted or what in the world they were doing there that night. Our last encounter is called the La Rubia Incident and happened in Brazil in 1977. A bus driver named Antonio La Rubia was driving at around 2:15 in the morning on the night of September 15th, 1977. As he drove along, he suddenly came upon this gigantic hat-shaped, lead-colored object that he estimated was approximately 250 feet across, and it was just sitting there in a field on the outskirts of where his house was. As he tried to just keep right along driving, maybe to be a looky-loo, looking out the window, seeing what's going on, I don't think that he stopped, but it's a little hard to tell by the source material here. It says he was suddenly paralyzed by an extremely bright, brilliant blue beam of light. He saw 3 entities before him, all 3 of them described as, quote, robots, end quote. Guys, I have so many videos and I just realized I might have covered this one before, but there's been so many, a double or a repeat is bound to happen. So just humor me as we go through this and then we'll see if it's the one I'm thinking it is. All right, moving back into the encounter, our witness claims that they were about 4 feet tall with very long antennas on their head, which were spinning all around non-stop. Their heads were shaped like footballs, but vertical, and a horizontal line of tinted blue mirrors were attached all along the sides of the head. Their one leg each extended into a sort of platform at the bottom. He described them further as being covered in, quote, scales, end quote, that were the color of aluminum but not shiny, more like matte or dull colored. Their arms were similar to the trunks of elephants and tapered off into one single fiber-like thing, and they allegedly wore belts with a bunch of syringes attached to it, or at least something that looked like syringes. Our witness stood there, still paralyzed by the light, and as he watched, the 3 beings came towards him, but they weren't walking, they were hovering. One of the entities took one of the syringe-like things and pointed it right at our terrified witness. This seemed to enable him to raise up off the ground and hover him toward the giant spaceship or craft. He was brought straight and directly into the craft, and as he was being forcibly brought in that direction, he actually looked and saw dozens of these exact robot beings following him in. The exact same ones, dozens. He was now inside the craft and made to sit down as all of the creatures dispersed, surrounding him. He was almost immediately moved into another room, and this is where he said he felt the craft start to take off. He was in some sort of circular chamber and estimated there to be about 24 robots in there with him at that time. He screamed at them asking, quote, "What do you want? Who are you?" end quote. As soon as our witness spoke to the creatures, they all collapsed on the floor of the circular room and started using their finger-like appendages to hold their rotating antennas still. He was immediately immobilized by the blue beam of light again, and as he sat there, he saw now that they were still, that the antennas were actually shaped like teaspoons. After this, I'm assuming this is once the robots regain their balance and composure, Rubia claims that one of the entities took a spinning object and used it to take a sample of his blood. The blood was then placed in front of some sort of machine that looked like what we would call a piano, and once that happened, he was all of a sudden shown a series of strange images. I think in his mind's eye he was shown this, but I'm not really sure if they were on like a projector screen at first. The images were said to be a huge factory where these robot beings were seemingly manufacturing UFOs. It was definitely a mass production of the exact ship Rubia claims to have seen and that he was sitting in right at that moment while he was witnessing this. Other images were being shown to him as well. There was an old train that quickly disappeared into an old tunnel. An image of himself in the nude with an angry dog barking as one of these robots melted into nothing right before his eyes. Suddenly then, the images were appearing directly on the wall in front of our witness when one of the robots inserted one of the syringes into the piano. All of a sudden and without any warning, our witness was suddenly crashing down into the road from high up in the air. He was free falling. It's like he was tossed or fell out of the spaceship. He soon realized he was in the city of Paciencia and he had all of his belongings with him, and his watch had also stopped. When he looked up, he saw what he thought to be the bottom of a ship shooting very fast back into the sky. He described it as looking like, quote, a huge dark balloon, end quote. The only other witness to this besides Rubia was the town drunk, and unfortunately, his testimony or witness statement did not lend any more credibility to the encounter, at least as far as what he saw. He claimed to have seen our witness fall from a flying ship and then quickly ascended back toward the sky. Again, though, this didn't help with credibility for obvious reasons. I wanted to do more and go on to the fanged creatures of Kofu, but I'm going to save that for another time. What do you guys think of all these encounters? Please be sure and let me know in the comments below. As I moved forward with the last encounter, I realized that this was not the same one I had covered last time, but it did involve the same creatures or beings, so I'm going to have to go back and check some of my other encounters with ETs and high strangeness videos in order to find the other person or people who also witnessed these very bizarre robotic type creatures from another place and possibly another time. Because that actually says something, right? When you have many different encounters of the same entity. That's how the Greys and the Reptilians actually became so popular. I know you guys love when I do this, right? I'm that girl, I know. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, hanging out with me, and if you just want to see me smile, spread the love by sharing this video. Gotta get that sub count up, guys. Spread that love, share this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you'd like to make a donation to the channel, then check out the description box because there are links to my PayPal, my Cash App, and my Patreon. If you donate $20 a month or more through Patreon, I will automatically, once a month, send you a link to a personal intuitive oracle reading, a bonus, as a thank you for your kindness and your donations. To everyone who's been making donations through Patreon or otherwise, I definitely appreciate you. Please join me with Ghost Dragon ZW every Wednesday night from 7:15 p.m. to 11:15, 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, where I do one card pulls for intuitive oracle reading live for like 4 to 4.5 hours. My steampunk princess outfit did show up. Thank you, Mike Roberts. Love you. Thank you guys for all of the gifts. My Amazon wishlist gift link will also be in the description box, along with the Amazon links for my 2 books that I already have out, Missing the Faith Theory and Encounters with Evil 101, Terrifying and True, stories that I wrote with co-author Steve Stockton. If you would like an autographed copy of either of those books, please hit me up before you make the purchase. Also, the second edition of the Paranormal Press magazine where I wrote for them is out this month already. I have not gotten my copy yet because I haven't been to the other house, but as soon as I do, I'm going to show it to you guys. Leave the link in the description box for you all right? I know that I'm missing something. Things got crazy for me very unexpectedly in the last week or so. And that's all. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything and can actually gain you so much. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. You deserve it. You're worth it. And if no one's told you today, you're amazing, you're wanted, you are loved. You're fantastic, okay? You are. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you next time. Bye.